Let's welcome Kate Marshall to Open Tech Talks for today's episode. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. If you introduce yourself for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kate Marshall, and my background is in cybersecurity training. But now what I do is I currently work with organizations, executives, and human resources teams, all bringing in their AI adoption into organizations, into the workforce. But all of that is with a security, safety, privacy, governance background.
And how long you've been doing it? Definitely from before AI. What was your role and what you were doing?
Yeah. So again, I come from the land of cybersecurity. I spent almost 20 years in that space. But then when ChatGPT landed and when we really started to see it being adopted inside of organizations, there was a huge hole that needed to be filled when it came to implementing it safely and securely, training the people. And I've been really heavily focused on that for the past 4 or 5 years.
Okay. So maybe before last week, what happened with
Yeah.
OpenAI and Hugging Face? So
Yeah.
before last week, how was being security was the prime objective by the organizations, or was just okay, let's take an AI as an adopted?
It really depends on the organization and the way that they think of their data. And so there are many organizations, especially in finance or healthcare, where they are beholden to much stricter laws and regulations. And so they're wading in very cautiously to AI. And then there are other organizations that are really leaning forward. They are wanting to bring in autonomous AI agents into the world and are really just trying to get the most of this technology. But I think all of them should be focused on security and, pre what happened last week, which is, a fascinating case study in itself. But when we think about governance and compliance and making sure that we are staying safe from breaches, it does not matter what size your organization is in. It does not matter the industry. Everybody should care about it. And there are very easy things that can be done for people to really protect themselves.
Okay. So let's start with some risks which you observed while working with different customers. And I think then maybe once we identify some of the risks, and then maybe you can share some of the practices which can be followed that will help the audience.
Yeah. I think the biggest risks really come from the humans that are orchestrating and wielding these tools, unfortunately, still. So they will download skills from sources that aren't trusted, and embedded in those skills are prompt injection. And so people will unknowingly download malware, or they will download instructions that will then send their password somewhere else when they're well-meaning, they're just trying to get real work done, but they are compromising their organization's data, they're compromising their security just by interacting and connecting tools without having the guardrails around them. That's really the
Okay.
biggest one that I'm seeing.
So you mentioned the prompt injection and then connecting your internal organization's data. Now, eventually, as an organization, if an employee's point of view, their objective is okay, how easy they can get right access to these tools.
Mhm.
And then being an organization, one security department is one part of it. But what is the way forward for anyone from a mid-sized organizations to maybe large enterprises? Is there some recipe how to not stop the adoption and also make sure that security is in line?
Yeah. So I think every implementation, every adoption needs to start with, okay, we're bringing in a tool, but what is the problem that it needs to solve? And really focusing on that as opposed to there's these new shiny cool tools out and they can do XYZ. And every organization, no matter the size, you need to have an AI policy that talks through what are the approved tools? How can you use them? How do they interact with the data? Where do you go when things go wrong? Things like that. But then you also have to think of everything that you connect your AI tools to is another entry and another access point. And so, very important to be thoughtful about the permissions that you give, the access that you give to these connectors, and making sure that your people understand how to use the tools and how to make sense of them really in that space.
Okay. But for small organizations, it's not easy, right?
Yeah.
So how they need to maybe a minimum type of a security measures they can put in place?
Of course. Yeah. And my heart goes out to these small businesses because you don't have the sysadmins or the IT department, thinking about these things. You don't have a whole legal team worried about where data is. But I think there are two things that every organization absolutely needs, no matter the size. You need an AI policy that everybody in the organization signs, and you need an approved tools list. And both of those things will showcase that you are thinking about compliance, you are thinking about security. And if there ever is any sort of a breach, you'll be able to prove that you weren't negligent going forward. But again, thinking through what are the tools that we need to be able to do the job to solve the problems, and what does that look like from there?
Okay. And now another question comes when as you are working from last 3 4 years, right? Any patterns are emerged from a security posture with AI, these LLMs? Any learning which you had while working with the different organizations?
Sure. The biggest one that I see is lack of continuous improvement and focusing on the human side and the change management side. And I see these organizations time and time again. They create an AI policy and then they go put it somewhere and it gets hidden and lost and people can't find it. And then they give you access to these large language models, but don't provide any kind of training. So it is very much like you are giving a team a brand new, fancy, shiny car, but you're not teaching them how to drive. And then from there, you're asking why nobody's going anywhere, you know? And so creating time and space for people to learn these tools and then really understand how they can use them in their daily work is something I'm seeing organizations not focusing on. And they really should
Okay.
be.
So you identified one of the prime areas on training the employees.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And based on this identification, what is the solution for an organization? What they need to do?
It's really to look at the tools that they've given them and they're have available, and then take a look at point people to a maturity ladder on each one of these tools. And it's not that difficult to do, especially if you're using your large language models, but then seeing where the gaps are. And again, we are giving people access to these tools, but we're not showing them how to use them. And it is an interesting conversation on how much of that onus should be put on the person learning these things as much as the employers creating that time and space for them to learn them. But I find that if you do a combination of the two and you, again, carve out time and space, set an expectation, you're going to see much more organizational growth and productivity when you actually give people the resources, the training, and the time available. But you have to get a sense of where they're at first and the tools that are available first before you can map and match the training.
Do you have any like a case studies or an examples which you can share with the audience? They can relate to it while you work with different customers or different.
Sure. I mean, there's lots of case studies out there about how to implement AI, how to bring them in correctly, and really creating like these edge twins. So if you think about an organization, it is an airplane in flight. And you cannot work on the engine when it is in flight. And so when you are wanting to change the systems and adopt AI and implement, you really need to create a digital twin of that system. So whether it's human resources or payroll or, any of these departments that you just cannot break, you want to make sure that you're pulling the information out, redeploying it, monitoring it before you then bring it back into the organization. And there's case studies out there for when it goes right, but there's a lot of things happening that are going wrong. And I imagine people don't love pointing the finger on that one.
Okay. So when situation is that, okay, organizations want to take and adopt quickly,
Mm-hmm.
while, okay, they set up the policy, a policy in place, but the pressure is so high and the race is on to adopt AI. So what is the balanced approach which you have observed or you can recommend someone?
Yes, I two things. One is you have to figure out the problem you're trying to solve. Are you trying to reduce costs? Are you trying to increase growth? Are you trying to maximize speed? Like what is the goal? Because without the goal, when you just say to your employees, we need to figure out AI, everybody starts flailing. There's no strategy, there's no organization to it, and it just gets really messy really quickly. So really, number one is you have to figure out the problem you're trying to solve, and leadership has to communicate that so everybody understands what the goal is and they can work together to work towards it. But then more importantly, you have to have adoption coming from both the top down and the bottom up. So you need the leadership teams running and having the strategy, and they're providing the budgets, they're providing the resources, they're the ones that are giving you the resources available to be able to see the strategy through. But then you very much need the employees buy in, because they are the ones that are having to run the plays and having to really make the change inside of the organization. So it has to come from both top down and bottom up for it to really work.
Okay. And once, okay, so both employees, organization as are have reached to a conclusion, okay, and there's
Mhm.
a framework set. Is that the assurance that, okay, now you have controlled and you are in place from a security stance point of view, or anything else you need to manage it?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, you have to have good governance. And what good governance looks like is everybody has their boundaries. They know what the rules are. They know the risks behind shadow AI usage. And they understand that, look, sometimes the tools aren't perfect, but with most of these large language models, you can, with a little bit extra work or a little effort, you can get them to do very similar things. But everything needs to work around those guardrails, those boundaries, and those governance, because nothing stalls productivity like a breach at this point. And so really making sure that they have all of the security in place. We understand who's managing what. We understand what you do inside of an incident if something goes wrong, what data can go into these large language models, what data can't go in. And all of that starts with that governance framework.
Okay, let's take an example. You work with some customer
Mhm.
X or Y, and what was the situation before you started working with them from overall? And then what usually activity you do that will enable them that yes, there is a now transformation before and after, and now they're confident, they're ready to go with any use case adoption.
Yeah. So I do work with a lot of small businesses that maybe they don't have an enterprise plan or a Teams plan with their large language model. And so the first thing that I do is, again, understand the problem that we're trying to solve, understand the scope. What that normally looks like is we get everybody wrapped into one system, because the more users you have protected and bundled in an enterprise or a Teams plan, one, the better these large language models work for you, because they're not generic. They understand the organization, they understand the company goals. And then from there, we create the AI policy. We make sure everybody understands it. We create the approved tools list. We work on incident response plans. And then I really focus in and hone in on training people on the systems. So these large language models have a lot of features, a lot of bells and whistles that are really helpful to people, and making sure that they understand that, how to create projects or GPTs, how to turn on scheduled tasks, how to train these large language models in your style and your tone of voice. So you're not getting AI slop, you're getting actually useful, helpful status with these, and then how the teams can work on these systems together so that way people aren't siloed. And so that's really what I do is I get them set up with a package, make sure that everybody's safe, everybody's understanding. I am teaching them how to drive in these systems. And then we focus in on the use cases and the job tasks that are most helpful to their role. And then when I usually wrap up a project, it's usually 3 to 6 months later. That is when I'm meeting with leadership and we're looking at the return on investment. We're looking at what we got from the token spend and how the teams are really using them. And then we'll create a plan to, okay, now you continue this work
Right.
and go on and evolve it from there.
Okay. And thank you for sharing this information. Now, if someone from our listeners, they are building the products and being a product development or a developer or engineer, you are infusing LLM as part of your product feature. And then you are releasing it maybe to your subscribers. What are the different regulatory requirements are or anything which they need to keep in mind when they will offer to these small businesses or maybe large enterprises? Any information which you can share with them for that?
Yeah. So if you're talking about you're creating an app or you're creating a product and you're leveraging a large language model off of it, I think where most people on the back end get stuck, and I have certainly gotten stuck myself, is the token usage and making sure that you think through how robust is the system, what happens when it becomes popular and you get a lot of activity, how much does that cost on the back end, and then thinking about the security and the safety of it. Because as we're seeing with different lawsuits that are coming out, like there's a Moby versus Workday lawsuit that is really defining the laws of who is accountable when something goes wrong. I think that is the one thing that I would absolutely hone in and focus in on when you're building a product that includes a large language model or it includes a specific wrapper to say, okay, if this breaks, if this goes wrong, who's accountable to this? And then work backwards from there of, okay, if the accountability is on me as the orchestrator, what do I need to do to further protect the system or further train the system to make sure that it's used for its intended purposes? So I say all that to hesitate. Like there's not just I have an idea, I'm going to release an app, and now I'm going to go sell it. If you're doing it thoughtfully, you really have to do a decent amount of back end training. Still very worth it, but it is not a set it and forget it type of situation. You have to think about accountability. You have to think about the governance and the security, and it is all dependent on what the product does, what the app does. Does it touch personal information? Do you have to care about GDPR or regulatory requirements? I mean, there's a whole slew of things that go in. So, all that to say is, I think my best advice is work with your large language model and say what needs to be done to keep this protected and safe, and then just work through that checklist together.
Okay. Okay. That's a good point. And any piece of advice for journal users? Right, maybe they are solopreneur or maybe they're entrepreneur and they're having their own businesses and they are just going left and right to subscribe to different tools, and then they're trying to find out right balance between productivity and the usage. So any piece of advice for them?
Yeah, I think I have two pieces of advice that's been really helpful to the people that I work with. One is you have to create time to be able to learn these things. And I am incredibly guilty of this as well, where I would sign up for classes or save videos or save links and all of those, I'm going to get to this later. And then you never do. And so what I did was I just blocked out calendar time. Like, this is my time to learn, and make sure that you're creating the time and space to be able to do that. And then the second thing is just take the pressure off. This is fun. Let's be creative and let's be curious about what these tools can do, because there is so much underlying pressure of, you know, I, AI is going to take my job. I have to figure this stuff out. I have got to learn these things. There's new features and new models coming out daily now at this point. And I would just say, continuous improvement, get a little bit better every day, create that time and space, and just play and have fun, with these tools and the possibilities that you could build with them.
Okay. And if someone from our listeners, she want to join or maybe pursue a career in cybersecurity or maybe for AI security, what is the best way nowadays to go for that?
Yeah, I think again it is very dependent on what you want to do. I would say my favorite place to start is YouTube. You can learn so much personally from the free content that's available there. You could leverage a tool like Notebook LM to bring in YouTube videos to really interact with the content well. But then once you hone in on, okay, I know I want to go into cyber AI, or I know I want to go into the different specific fields. This is again where I would partner with your large language model to look at the different options, the different certificate programs available, any kind of free training or paid training, and then, create that time and space to actually dive in to do it and use it. But again, using your large language models and using these AI tools to be able to help you learn and help you think.
Right. Now let's go back to the last week's incident. So the last week
Yeah.
incident of key question. I mean, my point is, will this affect the AI adoption? That okay, this is something happened now, and we need to take a pause, or that incident leads us to let's take a pause, but let's work on it, how to improve it or be better at it, or how to address that one. So, what's your main maybe takeaway from?
Yeah, I don't want to take a pause. I think what we need to do instead is we need to look at what are the guardrails, what is the sandboxing, what is the governance that we need to have wrapped around our data to make sure that we're more protected. But my fear is China's not taking a pause. I'm playing with Kimi K3 right now. It is an incredibly powerful tool. And so if organizations say, I'm going to step back and I'm going to stop, I don't believe personally that that is good for organizations to do. I think if anything, they need to lean in. They need to create more resources to support their governance, their safety, security, their privacy, making sure that their, personal information is safer, but that they should absolutely be leaning into this moment. And because I am just seeing these systems are growing and getting smarter, and don't take a pause. I guess would be my best advice is you've got to lean in. You have to understand what's available. You have to understand the problems that they can solve, and really get your people more involved in understanding how you can stay safe.
Right. Absolutely right. And the way the quickest adoption and the technology is moving, you can't take a pause and then just think, relax, be relaxed. Wait.
Yeah.
All right. So if someone want to reach out to you and they're interested to maybe talk to you, so what is the best medium where they can reach out to you?
Yeah. So my website, katemarshall.ai, has all of my information. I'm on Substack and LinkedIn, and I've got a school course based around a book that I wrote for less technical professionals. I have booking links. All sorts of things can be found on katemarshall.ai.
Okay, so maybe last question. What is this book about? What it talks about?
Yeah, it is not a reading book, it is a workbook that I
Okay.
built around patterns that I saw with the less technical professionals that I was working with. So if you're thinking about, just starting to bring AI into your organization, or if you have users that are slower to adopt, there's a certain subset of low-hanging fruit that can be really helpful for people to implement, like your emails and your meeting notes. And if you ever build like presentations and slide decks, and this book is really a step by step guide that goes through each one of these things that most office professionals could benefit from, and it's built that way. And it came out in February and it's already on its third update. So I update it very regularly. I've got living notes online that are available, QR codes throughout the book, because anything written with regards to AI now is outdated within a matter of months at this point. And so it's a living, breathing workbook that really helps non-technical professionals.
That's I liked it. It's a workbook that which anyone can take it up and then put it in practice.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge and experience with the audience. Any last comments you want to leave it for us?
I hope people can reduce their fear and take some of the pressure off and just again be curious and play with these tools. And I believe we live in an incredibly fun and fascinating time. And if we could just lean into that, I say all of that as an very realistic optimist. I understand that there is stress and I understand that there is frustration, but if you can lean in on the good and the benefits and really learn these tools with limited pressure, I think you'll be much better off.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yes. Thank you for having me.